Good morning. Our Sunday school lesson today is entitled True Friendship, and it's based a great deal on the relationship between uh, Jonathan and David. Of course, it comes from the Old Testament in 1 Samuel. Uh, Edwin Markham, probably a name in poetry that you never really studied in school, but he was an American poet whose style and diction were often mocked by critics. But because of the simplicity of his verses, lines of his poems are easily recalled and often quoted. As we look at our lesson about brotherly love today, these lines by the poet seemed appropriate to share. There is a destiny that makes us brothers. None goes his way alone. All that we give to the lives of others comes back into our own. Israel had gone through centuries where the nation's leadership depended on religious officials and prophets who attempted to enact and enforce laws based on ethical behavior and devotion to God. As individual families splintered among themselves and adapted different interpretations of the law and religious practices, the nation thought that it would be better to have a king to oversee and govern so that the people could better protect the nation's sovereignty. Well, there was a lot of concern, but eventually God spoke to Samuel, and Saul was chosen as king, and Samuel anointed him. But almost from the start, Saul's impatience and inability to remain true to his trust in God began to be evident. And God sent Samuel to Bethlehem, where there he would find David, a shepherd boy, who would be anointed as Saul's successor. But that was going to be a while down the road. Saul's prowess as a warrior enabled him to just incense the Philistines, who were the greatest military threat to Israel. But even in victory, Saul's ruthlessness and failure to trust God's guidance brought greater danger. He even considered killing his son Jonathan for unknowingly breaking a fast that Saul had commanded to be in effect throughout a day of battle. Men in Saul's army questioned this extreme punishment because Jonathan had been their leader on the battlefield. And Jonathan, because of that intercession, was not put to death. Later, when Saul began to suffer despondency or depression, his advisors suggested that God had sent an evil spirit to torment him. And they recommended that he find a musician who could play the harp and give him inspiration and comfort during these times of his frustration and melancholy. And their search brought David into the king's service. Soon afterwards, there was a battle with the Philistine forces, led by Goliath, the giant. And the young musician suddenly became Israel's heroic warrior. This event paved the way for the deep friendship of Jonathan and David. I'm going to read 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 through 4, and then chapter 19, verses 1 through 7, and then we'll skip to verse 20. As soon as David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan's life became bound up with David's life, and Jonathan loved David as much as himself. From that point forward, Saul kept David in his service and wouldn't allow him to return to his father's household. And Jonathan and David made a covenant together because Jonathan loved David as much as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his armor as well as his sword, his bow, and his belt. And then in the 19th chapter, Saul ordered his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, liked David very much. So Jonathan warned David, "My father Saul is trying to kill you. Be on guard tomorrow morning. Stay somewhere safe and hide. I'll go out and stand by my father in the field where you'll be. I'll talk to my father about you, and I'll tell you whatever I find out." So Jonathan spoke highly about David to his father, telling him the king shouldn't do anything wrong to his servant David, because he hasn't wronged you. In fact, his actions have helped you greatly. He risked his own life when he killed that Philistine, and the Lord won a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and were happy about it. Why then would you do something wrong to an innocent person by killing David for no reason? Saul listened to Jonathan and then swore, "As surely as the Lord lives, David won't be executed." So Jonathan summoned David and told him everything they had talked about. Then Jonathan brought David back to Saul, and David served Saul as he had previously. When Saul was told that David was in the camps at Ramah, he sent messengers to arrest David. They saw a group of prophets in a prophetic frenzy with Samuel standing there as their leader. God's Spirit came over Saul's messengers, and they fell into a prophetic frenzy. Well, I'm afraid some of these verses may seem a bit unrelated, so we're going to look at the way they do fit together. Some of you may be familiar with Tolkien's series of books about the Lord of the Rings. The Ring of Power proved to be a diabolical force that tempted even the greatest warriors and made them cast away values and friendships to try to attain the individual glory and power that the ring could provide them. But Frodo, just an ordinary hobbit from a peaceful shire, was ultimately chosen to carry the ring up the slopes of Mordor and toss it into the fires of Mount Doom to destroy it forever. His journey is filled with obstacles and pitfalls, and Frodo is on the verge of giving up. However, his traveling companion, Sam, continues to remind him that family and loved ones in the Shire are counting on him, and being faithful to his task is the only thing that will restore peace and harmony to them. Sam could not carry the ring for him, but he could continue to encourage and inspire Frodo, and it led to the destruction of the Ring of Power. The friendship between Jonathan and David seems to begin on the battlefield after the Philistine giant Goliath had terrorized and seemingly subdued the Israelite forces. And then the young shepherd boy who had been brought from Bethlehem to the court of King Saul to help soothe the irritable mood swings of Saul. Well, he stepped forward. David's 3 older brothers were serving in Saul's army, and David's father sent him to the battlefield with some food for them. He witnessed Goliath's taunting and watching the soldiers cower before him. Against the criticism of his older brother and even the concerns of King Saul, he asked permission to confront Goliath. Saul even gave him his tunic and a coat of armor, a helmet, and a sword. But David found that they did not fit him at all. And instead, he decided to face Goliath armed only with a sling and rocks that he had found in a stream. We know the outcome and the realization that God was leading David toward his leadership of the nation. But it also provided him with the opportunity to become the best friend of Jonathan. Later, after Goliath was defeated, Jonathan came up to David and he offered him his robe, his tunic, his sword, bow, and belt, showing that he considered him to be more worthy of royal status than anyone else in the kingdom. We must remember that Jonathan had early established himself as a great warrior and leader of the nation, accomplishing victories over the Philistines. There are no references as to why he had not been instrumental in confronting Goliath, but the disfavor of his father toward him from an earlier campaign when he ate a bite of honey after Saul foolishly had given orders that no one eat until the victory was attained, probably caused enough dissension to where he was not given leadership in another battle of that magnitude. But soon, Saul's obsession would also extend to David. And as Saul witnessed David's popularity with the people, he seethed with anger. He threw a spear at David as David played his harp, but David eluded him, so he then sent him to lead battles, hoping that the enemy would overpower him. But each time, David was victorious. Later, Saul's youngest daughter expressed her love for David, and Saul thought the marriage into his family would appease the people, and privately he thought it would give him more of an opportunity to send David on dangerous military missions. Well, several times Jonathan had to appeal to his father for David. But finally, there was this time when he asked Jonathan to kill David, and he would not be dissuaded. So Jonathan warned David to flee. This time would be the last that the two friends would meet. Jonathan would later be killed on the battlefield. But Jonathan had been loyal from the start and helped David prepare himself to rule the nation. As the eldest son of the king, Jonathan could have used David's popularity with the people to his personal advantage and possibly to usurp his father's authority and establish himself as king. But instead, Jonathan's concern for his friend enabled him to cast aside personal ambitions and recognize the potential that David possessed to serve Israel and to fulfill God's role in preparing the nation for a greater glory. Centuries later, there would be a successor in the line of David who would establish bonds of friendship that would enable people to find the presence of God in their hearts and lives, a presence that must be shared, even in turbulent times. Who knows when the brotherly love that reflects faith and Christian devotion will reach those whose lives are mired in hopelessness and despair. Have you ever attended a cross-country race and seen a pair of teammates running together where the one trailing the other picks up the pace that's set by the leader? And when the pace is too much for the leader, the teammate passes him. Each runner is supporting and challenging the other to give their best. You know, this is the weekend of the Daytona 500. I'm not a big proponent of stock car races. Too much noise and excessive waste of gasoline. But there are some life lessons on the track. Some drivers who may not have a shot at winning become a draft mate for a fellow competitor, enabling the follower to save on fuel and to be able to capitalize on the wind resistance that the car in front is providing until the last power reserves can be spent in passing during a dash to the finish line. Well, Friendship that comes as willingness to help others without asking for recognition or personal gain. That's what Jonathan offered to David. Last week, I attended a funeral of a man who was regarded as a friend to almost everyone in his church and community. He was a gifted mechanic and could probably get more out of an old automobile than would seem humanly possible. He was not an eloquent teacher, but the youth group that were in his Sunday school class saw him model the lessons that he shared each week. Long after they had aged out of those classes, they would remain his devoted friends. That's what the story of Jonathan and David reveals to us. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that a true friend is someone who can make us do what we can. We need to be that kind of true friend to others. Let's pray together. Dear God, today we're thankful for the friends who have encouraged us and given us hope. Please allow us to be that kind of friend and to allow your love to guide us in that effort. Amen.